Howdy, and orcs, dwarves, and delving. What more could you ask for in a video game? The Lord of the Rings franchise is really expansive at this point, much to the anger of some book purists, or movie purists, or people with eyes and a soul. And we have gotten a wide selection of video games based on the series throughout the years. Most of them take place during or alongside the main events of the books or the movies. You know how the story goes. The One Ring, Sauron, Hobbits, and Gollum, all of that. But what I find most interesting are games that take a unique spin on the series. Some take extreme liberties with the lore, while others try to slot themselves in with the main events. But then we have ones that try something completely unique, like Return to Moria. This is currently the newest Lord of the Rings game. Well, at the time of recording, since Tales of the Shire is about to release. But Return to Moria doesn't focus on the fat foot shorties, it focuses on the fat gut shorties. A game completely focused on Durin's Folk. And not only that, it is a survival crafting game, a genre completely new to the franchise. And since I'm on the topic, you may be wondering what the premise of the game is. The title does a good job of telling you that already, but I will clarify some things. The game is about Gimli leading a group of dwarves to retake Moria from the orcs that have been plaguing the great halls of Khazad-dûm. Gimli's role here is being reprised by John Rhys Davies, the same person who played him in the movies, which melted my heart.
Signs or kings are going to stop us. This is the time to reclaim Khazad-dûm.
His buttery voice narrates the intro and premise of the game, and it probably elevates the entire experience, knowing I was doing it for my boy. Gimli in the later years of his life is losing his patience waiting for Durin to return. Oh yeah, I suppose some quick background information would help for those of you who haven't read the books, since the movies don't really give you these details. Durin is one of the first 7 dwarves to enter Middle-earth. He was the greatest of kings, yada yada yada, he looked into a lake, seen his destiny among the stars, all of that deep lore stuff. He died.
In the arms of...
But then he came back, reincarnated as Durin II. So on and so on, we have had 6 Durins at this point, and most dwarves are waiting for the new Durin to lead an army to retake Khazad-dûm, because Khazad-dûm, also known as Moria, is the first home of Durin. But Gimli wants to rely on good old black powder knocking, because his beard isn't getting any less gray. Aw. This has unexpected consequences. Explosives? Unexpected consequences? Unthinkable! And an evil purple mist rolls in, freaking out everyone and causing a retreat. But we get caught on the wrong side of whatever happened. Boom. We are now alone in the depths of Moria. A dark power keeps us in, and keeps Gimli and company out. Now it's up to you, and your friends online, to venture.
Moria, you fear to go into those mines. The dwarves delved too greedily and too deep.
I'll go over more of the story later, but in terms of art, I think they really knocked it out of the park. Keeping in mind this is a $25 game, I obviously didn't expect Shadows of War, but with the limited resources, I think it looks great. It's important to keep in mind what the game is going for, and Return to Moria obviously wants everything to look like an abandoned dwarven city that has been occupied by orcs, and that's what it looks like. But they try to keep the environments varied by dividing the game into very distinct districts. I'll go over the district's gameplay aspects later, but in terms of art design, it really does a good job of keeping things fresh. I was afraid before playing that it would really be a mishmash of rocks and stone, rock and stone, which it is, but then you find an elven district, littered with trees and curved design, a stark contrast to the dwarves' hard edges and very square designs. Then you venture into the deep dark, where the caves are all lit up by luminescent mushrooms. You find ancient dwarven cities lined with abandoned buildings, orcish prisons flooded with red fog. It really does a fine job at being creative with what could have been an endless repetition of rock and stone, but it can be odd at some points. What you would definitely expect from procedural generation. Sometimes you will see the same strange dwarven machine littered everywhere, like it's a vending machine at a zoo, but this was rare. But you will also come across unique structures that aren't procedurally generated, and they look great. Now this is a little bit of the gameplay aspect, but some of these ancient relics need to be rebuilt, and it's extra rewarding to do so, considering this is the primary way to expand the map. You will be adventuring and suddenly you will see a massive structure that requires materials to fix it up. Congratulations, you've just discovered your next objective. Overall, I was very happy with all the level design on display here. However, enemy designs can be strange. The goblins and orc look well enough for their budget, but then you get enemies like the goblin men who look comically strange. It's like a WoW goblin found the creatine, and in the deepest parts of Moria, we actually find the nameless things that Gandalf spoke of. He said they were so unknowable and they were so utterly evil, he wasn't even gonna utter their descriptions to darken the light of day. Yeah, it's just a fire dog. The dwarves look great for the most part, and orcs do have different designs depending on their location, but sometimes it makes me raise an eyebrow. But lighting is a key factor in the game as well. Return to Moria plays with lighting more than I see most games do, for good and for bad. First, the good. When adventuring in certain areas, it can be mesmerizing, with light shining through ancient stained glass above the mountain. Those mushrooms I mentioned earlier give off a creepy yet somehow warming presence. The ancient purple mist standing out in stark contrast to the dark ancient pathways. When you see a group of orcs standing in an eerie moonlight, it feels great. The issue is, it's almost always ruined by your left hand, since this will be your pose about 80% of the game. I'm going to be getting into gameplay aspects now, and even though I love this game a lot, like a lot, I'm going to start with my biggest issue. The game is dark. I'm talking middle of the woods where I grew up dark, expecting to hear a lone banjo sitting in the middle of the woods dark. And I know some of you are rolling your eyes because, duh. You're in an ancient mine untouched by beings of good for many years. Of course it's dark, dingus. The issue is, the game tries to use light as a reward. Let me explain. This will be you most of the time. A torch is essential for playing the game, because if you are not in a light source, despair will take over and it will slowly kill you. This basically acts as a poison if you aren't holding a torch for long enough. I mean, I get it. They wanted it to feel like adventuring abandoned ruins and mines, and it succeeds at that. Sometimes it actually felt immersive and awesome. Walking into a mine shaft, holding my pickaxe and torch, made me feel like a dwarf taking back my homeland. Venturing out of the dark only to see the glow of my base in the distance, it felt comforting in the best of ways. The issue is what I like to call the arm system. You play a dwarf with 2 arms. Obviously, this isn't about Kamaji taking back the bathhouse, but each arm has a purpose. The right arm is used for things you swing, and I say that and not weapons because it's also for pickaxes and hammers. Now your left arm is used for offhand equipment, mainly a torch or a shield. See the problem? So you are choosing to see clearly or defend yourself, and even worse, you have a 2-handed weapon and you get neither. This can cause some fights to be frustrating and annoying, not fun or hard. You can throw flares like a madman, but that's just a band-aid, because they last for a shockingly short amount of time, not even enough for the enemies to show up sometimes. And to properly place a torch on a wall, it involves clicking around menus, and look, this isn't happening when this is in front of you. And the game seems to know this, since you get a mining helmet that lights the area around you and never dies. Problem solved, right? Not quite, since this provides very little protection compared to the proper helmets in the game, and you're going to need that protection the further you get in the game. Return to Moria does not have a level up system. Your stats and growth are tied directly to your equipment and the buffs you gain from the things you cook at your home. So again, you're trading defense for the pleasure of seeing 2 feet in front of yourself. You may think I'm overreacting, and I might be a little, but to drive my point home, there's a forever torch you can craft at a large forge. It lasts forever and shines on your back at all times, even when it's not equipped. The perfect solution, but it's a mastercraft, and you can only carry 1 mastercraft at a time, and some mastercrafts are necessary to continue the game, such as a pickaxe or a weapon. So being able to see properly is considered a mastercraft that is worth just as much as a legendary weapon. It's annoying, and it's not because of the resources it takes to make another torch. It takes 1 piece of wood. The mastercraft is literally as valuable as legendary items. I watched a few other reviews online just because I was curious about other people's thoughts on the game, and one guy said he wore the mining helmet 90% of his playthrough. That should not be the solution here. I'm harping on this so long because this is my biggest issue with the game. The solution is quite easy. Allow me to build this attachment for any of my helmets, and boom, the problem is solved. Because other than that, Return to Moria might be one of my favorite games I've played in years. I'm going to be diving deep into the gameplay now, and to keep it simple, I'm going to be talking about each gameplay aspect separately. First, let's talk about the largest gameplay aspect, and the most enjoyable one, exploration. Return to Moria is very similar to something like Valheim. It's a survival crafting game all about adventure and exploration, but of course, this game has dwarves, instantly making it much better. They are the best fantasy race after all. My wife would argue against me, but she's wrong, and so are you. It's dwarves. They're the best. Okay, my point is made. Let's get back into the gameplay. As you play, you'll notice the game will quickly turn into a cycle of sorts. You sit back at your base, build, cook, and armor up, until you decide,
I'm going on an adventure!
So you load your backpack with the essentials, such as weapons, wood, stone, and food. You examine your map to find areas you haven't plundered yet, and you make the long journey there. You fight off the horrors of the depths and gather increasingly rare materials the deeper you go. It's a tried and true loop that works well. Navigating Moria can take a little bit of time to get used to, but once you understand the basic flow of the world, it can be a blast to delve into. I always felt a strange sense of wonder every time I seen a dirt wall, because my experience with the game tells me that behind any dirt wall is usually valuable materials or a new pathway, or a group of enemies to purge, with bearded justice.
I myself am sitting pretty on 43.
Sometimes you enter these massive ore mines. There's pathways climbing up and down and all around. These parts of the game are probably the sections I will look back the most fondly at. I mean, look at this, it looks great. These areas made me think back to these scenes in The Hobbit, and this makes seeing those unique structures I mentioned earlier hit all the more powerfully. You are definitely rewarded for your exploration with this stuff. But the exploration is more than just running around aimlessly though, because it flows perfectly into the building aspect of the game. When you get a new material, you will unlock a lot of recipes that item can be used to build. This causes the exploration to feed directly into creative crafting, and it works well. The crafting overall is a very satisfying progression system. There is a lot of crafting stations, and even add-ons to existing ones. These will slowly unlock the deeper you dig, increasing the possibilities for you to build. There are even more advanced versions of stations to be unlocked as you go. The game is extremely generous with the base building as well. In order to build, you need a hearth, but you can place a hearth pretty much anywhere you want, so the whole map can be a playground of finding the coolest place you want to set up shop. The downside is the rotation is limited to 90 degrees, so this can definitely limit some of your ideas, but I still had a blast building my bases. In my first playthrough, I chose to embrace my inner cave goblin and built a hidden cabin deep in the mines. I basically went as efficient as possible with the build, but in my second playthrough, I built a mountainside fortress above a river. I really love this part of the game, but you will have to constantly be upgrading your equipment to mine further into the ancient world, building more and more elaborate machines to aid you in that. You live up to your dwarven title because I mean, you hoard everything. It's to the degree that the game gives you hoard stashes. Adventure and exploration is the entire draw of the game here. Around any corner could be a new ore vein, ranger camp, ancient outpost, or a new group of enemies to battle. The game's districts are distinctly divided up. The start is easy to navigate and follow. It feels like your standard dwarven ruins. Then you get to the Elven district, which is one giant room filled with trees and greenery. This whole area's focus is to slowly take back the whole area from orcs. After that is the mines of Moria. This is the biggest area in the game and is where a good amount of any playthrough is going to take place. It is a scaling, monumental trench, deeper and deeper, confusing and confusing. It's the highlight of the game, and that isn't saying the rest of the game still isn't great. But after this, the lower depths is the worst part of the game, honestly. It looks beautiful, but it's the second darkest place in the game, and the poison mushrooms are everywhere. The enemies even poison you when they hit you. This place is basically a massive swamp maze. Why did we need this? After this is the two dwarven cities. Both of them are expansive wonders that are an absolute treat to explore. I cannot emphasize enough the exploration aspect of the game. This is the biggest highlight, way more than any battle. Oh yeah, battle. That's also a pretty big part of the game. Across the internet, I primarily heard two words used to describe the combat: simple and jank, and I can echo that to some degree. It's rather simple when you look at it. We aren't dealing with in-depth systems like in Shadow of Mordor, and it's important to keep in mind that's not what the focus of the game is anyways. But combat is here. Here's how it works. Click to attack, hold to do a power attack. That's your offense. In terms of defense, you can right click to block, and then you can bash while blocking to knock over enemies, and you can roll like any other game released after Dark Souls. That's the extent of the options.
And you know what this dwarf says to that?
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
I mean, there's bows. Click to shoot. There you go. It may seem like I'm joking about this, but no. That's the combat. The only other notable thing is the weapon types. Swords are good against single enemies, axes have a wider arc but do less damage, and hammers are really good against armored enemies. There are also spears good for poking, and of course you have two-handed variants of these. On top of that, there is a rune table to enchant your weapons with different buffs. But in terms of actual gameplay mechanics, what I said is literally all there is. And that may sound like a huge downside, but I don't really think it is. The combat isn't why you're playing this game, it's the exploration, and to feel like the best fantasy race for once. Enemy variety is pretty small, most of the game just consisting of orcs and goblins, with the occasional animal thrown in. So fights have a formulaic rhythm to them. You will also encounter mini-bosses from time to time, but they are easily juked, and most will actually drop the orcs faster than you can. In terms of pure bosses throughout the game, they are few and far between. They are all pretty easy, but they are a good change of pace at the end of the day. They usually cap off the end of an area, and are more of a gear check, making sure your dwarf is actually ready to continue to the next area of the game. Their designs are pretty interesting as well, but only one boss in the whole game felt like a really creative endeavor, other than the last boss, of course. I won't be spoiling any boss other than the first one, because the bosses are all designed in a way to be a surprise. They are all meant to be a page turn of sorts. You reach a certain area of the game, and suddenly, boom, a crazy boss is now here, deal with it. It's another highlight in my opinion. The combat doesn't feel bad, just simple and straightforward. Yay, you are a dwarf. Oh yeah, dwarves. The game goes to extensive lengths to make you feel like a dwarf. From brewing ale to cooking hearty meat meals, they got you covered. Your ale and food give you huge buffs, and they even allow you to cook to-go food and bring ale with you in a travel canteen. On top of that, at the beginning of the game you can customize your dwarf, including the ability to select a voice. Some of them actually primarily speak in the language of the dwarves. Just more great details that are extremely unnecessary inclusions, but they felt like love letters to the franchise. And the game actually improves on something the movies failed pretty bad at: the music.
You're a lying rat!
No, I don't mean the soundtrack. The movies actually have my favorite soundtrack of all time. I mean the very musical nature of the world of Middle-earth. They do include it here and there with some characters singing beautiful songs, but they really failed at this aspect with the dwarves. You have to remember, The Hobbit is, in its very nature, a children's book. Tolkien actually wrote it in a way that was meant to be read to children at bedtime. The chapters are designed in such a way where each chapter is a different bedtime story, and because of this, the books are very musical. The dwarves sing countless songs in the books. The first Hobbit movie at least attempted to bring a light to this part of the story, talking about that misty mountain cold. That's a bop. But in the books, this is emphasized much more. I mean, in Lord of the Rings, Gimli actually sings a beautiful song to the Fellowship as they travel Moria. My favorite line of that song being, "The world is grey, the mountain old, the forge's fire is ashen cold. No harp is rung, no hammers falls, the darkness dwells in Durin's halls. The shadow lies upon his tomb in Moria in Khazad Dûn. But still the sunken stars appear, in dark and windless Miramir. There lies his crown in waters deep, till Durin wakes again from sleep." So you can imagine the huge smile on my face when I heard that the dwarves could sing in this game, and it even gives you buffs. The dwarves will even harmonize as they sing.
The tavern in the deep, they say, hum-daddy-o-day-o, where the barkeep croons to a...
Once you start mining ore, you're given the option to sing, and it buffs your character. It's beautiful. It's an incredible detail and elevates the whole game drastically for me. On top of that, there are actually memorials of Durin throughout Moria, and you can actually sing a beautiful song in the dwarves' language to these statues. Sometimes this is even required to continue the game.
Till Durin wakes from sleep.
The game does an absolutely wonderful job showing this aspects of the world, and this side of the dwarves. Other than the beautiful singing in the game, the rest of the soundtrack is good. Orchestral beats hit at major events in the game. But other than that, the music does what it's supposed to do. It's simply something to keep you company as you play in the Dark Mines. And it's very comforting. It hits really hard when you're at your base. So, it's fine. Lastly, I want to quickly touch on the story. As I mentioned, I adore the premise of the game, but in terms of the story the game follows, it's minimal. Your only companion throughout the whole game is Auric, son of Auric.
I am Auric, son of Auric.
It's Bird. Every now and again, you'll meet up with your beaked buddy, and he will help guide you in the right direction. The further you get into the mountain, you will discover the meanings of the Purple Curse and how to escape. I'm not going to spoil the reveal, because it actually threw me off guard, and I want you to experience that as well. The story is meant to be an excuse to delve deeper into Moria, and it does that, so it works. Now I will say the game does hold true to the core of Lord of the Rings, that being hope. Hope is the essence of Middle-earth. The world may seem lost, but as long as there are those who will stand against the dark, there is hope. Aragorn and company would have failed if they didn't have the hope of Frodo. Sam carries Frodo because of the hope instilled within him and his friend. Without hope, everything is Mordor, and Return to Moria holds true to that. Even though we delve into a dark mountain surrounded by evil, curses, and abominations, we have hope. We have a light that shines through. We have the hope of Durin's return. We can take back the mountain. We can take back Khazad Dûn, and we can hold true to the hope of Durin. And I love that. But at the end of the day, the main point of the game is the exploration, building, and being a dwarf. And as I said, they nailed all those parts of the game. So yeah, It's an easy recommendation from me. I quite enjoyed it a lot, and I'm still playing it as I write this script, so yeah. Anyways, thanks guys. See ya.